when my son-in-law's voice thundered, "You'll either respect the man of this house or pack your things and leave." I didn't argue. I simply smiled, picked up my old suitcase, and walked out, leaving behind the home I had poured my entire life into. They expected me to cry, to plead like before. But not this time. This time I had a plan. A week later I saw 24 missed calls blinking on my phone screen, and that was just the beginning. They had no idea what I'd set in motion. They would soon understand the weight of their words. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments below. My fingers still clutched the house keys when I pushed open the front door, the grocery bags digging painfully into my wrists. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, coating the living room in a golden calm, a light that usually made me feel at peace. But not today. Evan lounged in my favorite armchair, the one Lillian had gifted me just before she passed away. His feet were up on the coffee table, socks half off, a half-empty beer can hanging loosely from his hand. The remote rested on his stomach like a crown of entitlement. "Hey, grab me another beer from the fridge, will ya?" he said without even looking up from the screen. I set the grocery bags down carefully, my palms still red from the plastic handles. "Excuse me, you heard me?" he replied lazily, eyes glued to the football match. "And not that cheap stuff you drink, and get me something decent." A chill ran through me. I'd bought that brand especially for him, with money from my meager pension. "Evan," I just walked in. "Let me at least put these groceries away." He finally looked at me then, wearing that same condescending look, the one that always made me feel small. "What's the problem?" "You're already standing. Don't make it a scene. I'm comfortable." "The problem," I said quietly, "is that this is my house." Evan's feet hit the floor with a dull thud. He straightened up slowly, using his height like a weapon. At 31 he was taller, broader, but I'd been standing up to difficult men long before he was even born. "Your house?" he scoffed. "That's funny, because your daughter and I live here now. My paycheck covers the bills." "Details matter, old man." He took a slow step closer, beer still dangling from his hand. "Look, Walter, we can keep things easy, or make them real unpleasant. You want peace here? You play by my rules. Simple as that." The kitchen door creaked open. Emily appeared, her auburn hair tied in a messy bun, a dish towel slung over her shoulder. She froze when she saw us, Evan towering over me, the air between us thick and sharp. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice holding that sharp edge I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "Your father's being difficult," Evan said without looking at me. "I just asked him to grab me a beer and he's turning it into some kind of drama." Emily shot me a look of disappointment, the kind you give a child misbehaving in public. "Dad, just get him the beer. It's not worth it." But Evan wasn't finished. He stepped even closer now, close enough that the sour mix of alcohol and arrogance rolled off him. "Here's how it's gonna work, Walter," he said softly. "You live in our house. You pull your weight. That means when I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions, no attitude." "Our house?" I asked, my tone calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "That's right," Emily said, stepping up beside him, shoulder to shoulder with her husband, the same girl who once used to hold my hand crossing the street. "Dad, you need to decide right now. Either you help Evan and show some respect, or you can pack your things and leave." The words hung there, heavy and slow like smoke that refused to clear. I looked at my daughter, searching for the smallest flicker of the little girl who once used to curl up beside me during storms. All I saw was the same cold expression Evan wore. "All right," I said quietly. Evan's lips curled into a smirk. "Good. Now about that beer, I'll pack." The smirk vanished. Emily's mouth parted slightly, like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard, as if she'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to obey. I didn't. I turned toward the hallway, leaving the grocery bags where they sat, behind me. I heard silence, the kind that follows a storm no one saw coming. Evan drew in a sharp breath. Emily whispered, "Dad, wait." But I was already walking down the hallway, each step steady against the creaking wooden floor that Lillian and I had sanded and polished together over 20 years ago. The old suitcase came down from the closet shelf with a soft thud. I'd bought it for our honeymoon to Blue Ridge, back when Lillian was still alive and the road ahead seemed endless. Now it lay open on the bed, ready to swallow what little remained of my life in this house. I packed quietly, methodically. Underwear, socks, 3 sets of clothes, not everything, just enough. From the living room drifted the muffled sound of whispers. Evan's sharp tone cut through occasionally, followed by Emily's softer attempts to calm him. They were probably figuring out what to do, how to respond to the old man who'd finally stopped bending. My hands moved on instinct, folding shirts, rolling ties, not hesitating once. A framed photo of Lillian went into the side pocket, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. My medication, my glasses, the small leather journal where I tracked every expense, and all tucked neatly inside. When I rolled the suitcase down the hallway, their voices stopped. Evan was back in the recliner, but his posture had changed, shoulders tense, eyes following my every move. Emily stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed tight, trying to look composed, but her lips trembled just enough to betray her doubt. Neither of them said a word, not even goodbye. The car started on the first try, my old Chevy, faithful as ever. I backed out of the driveway without glancing at the windows, without caring whether they were watching. The 30-minute drive to Maple Lodge gave me time to think. Memories came uninvited, one after another. As I passed through downtown Haversfield at Emily's college tuition, nearly $40,000 a year for that fancy private university she'd insisted on. I'd worked overtime for 4 years straight, taking extra shifts at the credit union, reviewing loan applications long after the lights went out. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I remembered the paperwork, the exhaustion, the sacrifices. Her wedding alone had cost $25,000. Every cent of it paid by me. Evan's family couldn't afford their share. So I covered it, quietly, not wanting to embarrass anyone. The reception hall, the flowers, her dress, everything, had to be flawless for my little girl's special day. Then came the house. $80,000 from my retirement savings went toward their down payment. I told myself, that's what fathers did. Helped their children get started in life. That's what Lillian would have wanted, month after month. The payments followed like clockwork. $200 for their mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when money ran tight. My pension and Social Security checks disappeared into their lives piece by piece, and I convinced myself that was love. The Maple Crest Inn sat at the edge of town, a squat, aging building with peeling blue paint and a neon sign that buzzed weakly in the wind. The room was small but spotless. A bed, a single chair, and a narrow table beneath a window that looked out onto the empty parking lot. I placed my suitcase on the rack and sank onto the bed's edge. The silence here felt different, not the peaceful quiet of a home, but the hollow stillness of somewhere meant only for passing through. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through my contacts. Banks, insurance offices, card services, numbers I knew by heart after 3 decades in finance. Tomorrow was Sunday, but there were still things I could do, calls that could be made, steps that could be taken. I opened my laptop on the small table. The glow of the screen illuminated the faded wallpaper as my account balances appeared. Checking, savings, retirement. Numbers that stood for a lifetime of discipline, of saying no to myself so I could always say yes to them. The cursor blinked in the search bar, waiting for me to decide what came next. By Sunday morning, the sky hung low and gray, the kind of dull light that mirrored my mood perfectly. I spread my paperwork across the motel table like a strategist preparing for war. Bank statements, insurance policies, legal documents, everything organized, aligned, ready. The first call went to Ridgeview National Bank. Sunday banking had its limits, but automated systems never slept. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," the representative said after I maneuvered through the endless maze of recorded menus. "How can I assist you today?" "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 1290 Maple Drive, account ending in 6314. A brief pause followed, the rhythmic clicking of keys in the background. "Sir, I see that payment's been active for nearly 5 years. Are you certain you'd like to discontinue it?" "Completely sure. May I ask the reason for the change?" "The homeowners no longer qualify for my financial assistance." More clicking. A few seconds of silence. Very well, Mr. Holloway. The automatic payment has been canceled, effective immediately. You'll receive written confirmation within 3 business days. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. The second call came easier. Stateway. Insurance had been covering both of their cars under my name for 3 years. Evan's Ford Ranger and Emily's compact sedan. $280 a month for vehicles I never touched, for accidents I'd never be responsible for. I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy, I told the agent. My daughter and son-in-law will need to secure their own coverage. When would you like that change to take effect? Today. The credit card companies took more time. Emily was an authorized user on 3 of my accounts: Visa, MasterCard, and a department store card. $500 a month in payments for balances I hadn't created. Purchases I hadn't made. Mr. Holloway, the Visa representative said politely, removing authorized users will mean they'll have to reapply under their own names. Any outstanding balances remain your responsibility, but they won't be able to make new charges. I understand, I said. Remove them immediately. Each call was like lifting another stone off my chest. 3 decades in finance had taught me the system's language, the exact phrasing, the loopholes, the procedures. Everything I was doing was clean, legal, unquestionable. Even the life insurance change, though it required written confirmation, had already been set in motion, step by step. I was reclaiming everything that had quietly been taken from me, 1 account, 1 signature, 1 policy at a time. $100,000. That was supposed to go to Emily one day. Money I'd earned to secure my family's future. But family had started to mean something very different now. By noon, I'd made 8 calls. Mortgage payments canceled. Insurance terminated. Credit cards closed. Automatic transfers, the slow leaks that had been draining my accounts for years, all shut off with polite exchanges and confirmation numbers. I leaned back in the stiff motel chair and reviewed my notes. Confirmation numbers, reference codes, effective dates, each one a small victory, each line a declaration of independence. My phone sat motionless on the table. No missed calls, no messages. They didn't know yet, not yet. They wouldn't realize anything until the first mortgage draft bounced or when the next bill came addressed directly to them, not me. But they would. Soon. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Across the parking lot, an older man was loading suitcases into the back of a dusty pickup. His wife stood beside him, pointing, smiling, correcting him gently. A quiet choreography built over decades. Maybe they were heading home after visiting grandkids, or maybe finally taking that long-promised road trip. I watched them for a while, feeling a pang of something like envy. Lillian and I had been like that once. A seamless rhythm, unspoken, effortless. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I let it ring. The week passed quietly, at least for me, apparently not for them. I fell into a rhythm at the Maple Crest Inn, coffee from the lobby each morning, breakfast at a small diner down the road, long walks through Haversfield's quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods. My phone gathered missed calls like a strange kind of trophy collection I never meant to start. By Wednesday, there were 12 messages. By Friday, 22. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed and played them back in order, listening to the slow unraveling. The first few were calm, almost polite. Emily asking if there'd been some kind of mistake with the mortgage draft. Evan leaving curt, irritated messages about the car insurance lapsing. But as the days passed, the tone changed. The irritation turned to alarm, and then to panic. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Emily's voice cracked with frustration. "The bank says you stopped the automatic payment. They're demanding the full amount by Friday, or they'll start foreclosure proceedings." Evan's messages had grown increasingly aggressive. "Walter, you need to fix this right now. People are asking questions about my insurance. You're making us look like deadbeats." The later calls bordered on begging, Emily crying, promising they'd work something out if I'd just call her back. Evan trying a different tone, saying he'd been too harsh and wanted to make things right. I deleted each message after listening, feeling only a detached curiosity at their spiraling desperation. On Thursday morning, there was a knock at my motel room door. Through the peephole, I saw them both, Emily in a wrinkled sweater, Evan still in his work clothes, both looking like they hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Dad?" Emily's eyes were rimmed red. Her usual composure cracked. "We need to talk." "About what?" Evan pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. "About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about beer." "I'm not trying to ruin anything," I said evenly. "I'm simply no longer paying for your lives." "The mortgage, Walter." Evan's voice rose. "You can't just stop paying the mortgage. That's our house." "Actually," I said quietly, "it's my house. My name is on the deed. My signature on the loan. You two were just guests." Emily grabbed Evan's arm as he stepped closer to the door. "Dad, please. We can work this out. Evan was wrong to talk to you that way. We both were. But you can't just leave us with no warning, no discussion. You gave me an ultimatum," I reminded her. "Do what Evan says or get out. Those were your exact words." "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes," I said softly. "You did." I looked at my daughter, seeing a stranger wearing her face. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect me to choose option 2. Evan tried a different tactic, his voice suddenly calm in that practiced, artificial way people use when they're trying to hide panic. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean," he began. "But you're talking about our home, our credit, our entire lives. You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this." "I can," I said flatly. And I did. I started to close the door. "You wanted me gone. I left. You wanted to handle your own lives. Now you can." "Dad, wait!" Emily's voice cracked, raw and trembling. "What about family? What about everything we've been through together?" I paused, studying her face, desperate, tear-streaked, unsteady. For just a moment I saw the little girl who used to help me rake leaves every autumn, who'd run across the yard with fistfuls of dandelions, declaring them flowers for Daddy. But that little girl had grown into a woman who could stand by silently while her husband humiliated her father in his own home. "Family works both ways, sweetheart," I said quietly. "I spent 5 years taking care of you both. And when it was time for you to take care of me, you chose him instead." Evan's fake composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his voice trembling with rage. "You crazy old man, you can't just—" "I can call the police if you keep raising your voice," I cut in sharply. "This is private property and you're disturbing the peace." They both froze. For the first time in years, I think they actually saw me. Not the soft-hearted father, not the convenient wallet with a pulse, but a man who had finally learned the word no. Evan grabbed Emily's elbow, muttering, "Come on. We'll figure this out ourselves." They turned back toward their car. Evan's swagger reduced to a worried slump. Emily glancing over her shoulder one last time, her eyes filled with disbelief, like she was staring at a stranger. I watched until the car disappeared down the road. Then I quietly closed the door and walked back to the small table where my laptop waited. There were still calls to make, still accounts to close. The work of dismantling a lifetime of misplaced loyalty was far from done. I needed coffee, and a moment to think clearly. The diner on Main Street had always been my refuge back when Lillian was alive. She loved their cinnamon rolls, and somehow, that memory made the idea of breakfast there feel like the right way to start this new chapter. She used to meet me there after her doctor appointments, and we'd share a slice of warm apple pie, always with 2 forks, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. By Tuesday morning, I found myself walking those same 3 blocks again, my breath visible in the crisp mountain air. The routine felt grounding, a calm after yesterday's storm. I'd spent the morning reorganizing my paperwork, reviewing account closures and confirmation numbers like a general double-checking his battle strategy. The diner's bell chimed softly as I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of coffee, bacon and fresh biscuits wrapped around me, that ordinary comfort I hadn't realized I'd missed. I'd barely slid into my usual corner booth when a voice broke through the low chatter. "Well, I'll be damned," Walter Holloway. I looked up. Robert Hayes, an old friend, was rising from a table by the window, newspaper tucked under his arm. We'd worked together for nearly 15 years at Haversfield Trust Bank before his transfer to the main branch. He'd handled commercial accounts. I'd managed personal ones. We'd shared too many late coffees and Friday jokes not to call it friendship. "Bob," I said, standing to shake his hand. "Good to see you. Mind if I sit?" he asked, already sliding into the seat across from me. "Haven't seen you since Lillian's service." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Heard you moved out to Maple Crest Inn. Everything all right?" The waitress appeared before I could answer, refilling my cup with that bottomless small-town hospitality. I used the pause to think. How much should I tell him? "Family situation," I said finally. "Needed some time to clear my head." Bob nodded, studying me over the rim of his cup. "That son-in-law of yours, Evan, right? He tried to pull a fast one on us a few months back." My hand froze halfway to my lips. "A fast one?" "Yeah," Bob leaned forward, his voice low. "He came in trying to get a home equity loan on your house. $50,000. Claimed it was his property." I set the cup down slowly. "My house?" He nodded grimly. "Said he was on the deed. Even brought paperwork. Phony stuff, but well done. We caught it in underwriting." The hum of the diner seemed to fade into a hollow silence, the clatter of dishes, the low music, the smell of frying bacon, all distant now. Evan hadn't just disrespected me. He'd tried to steal from me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something sharp and certain rise inside me, not anger. Not grief, but purpose. "That's right," Bob said, shaking his head. He had paperwork that looked legitimate at first glance. But once we ran the title search, he trailed off, sighing. "Everything came back to you, of course. Clean title, no co-signers, no secondary claims. The property's yours through and through." I set my cup down carefully, the ceramic clinking faintly against the saucer as I processed what he was saying. "When exactly did this happen?" "December," Bob said after a moment. "Maybe early January. I handled the file myself because of the loan size." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Walter, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate fraud. The documents he submitted were forged." The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. 3 months ago, and long before our argument, Evan had already been planning to steal from me. This wasn't desperation. It was calculation. "Did you report it?" I asked quietly. "We rejected the application and flagged his information in the system," Bob said. "Technically, since no funds changed hands, it sits in a legal gray area. But I kept copies of everything. Signatures, forms, fake notary seals. All of it." He studied me, frowning. "You really didn't know?" I shook my head slowly, my mind reeling. All those months I'd been covering their bills and mortgage payments, groceries, insurance, while sitting across the table from him as he smiled and complained about money problems. And the entire time, he'd been planning to rob me blind. What was he going to use the money for? Bob's eyes darted around the diner before he leaned in closer. "According to the application, home renovations." He paused, lowering his voice to almost a whisper. "But word around town is that Evan's got gambling debts. Pretty bad ones." My pulse quickened. "How bad are we talking?" "Jim Morrison might know more," Bob said. "Remember him? He's with the Haversfield Police Department now. You two served on that church committee together years back, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. "His daughter was in Emily's graduating class." "Then you know he's solid." "He mentioned to me a while back that Evan's been a regular at High Ridge Casino, and not the casual kind of regular. The kind that owes people money." I reached for my wallet, sliding a few bills onto the table to cover the untouched coffee. "Bob, I appreciate you telling me this." He gave me a grave nod. "Be careful, Walter. A man who forges documents to steal from his own family. That's the kind who gets dangerous when he's cornered." I walked the 3 quiet blocks back to Maple Crest Inn, the cold wind cutting against my coat. My mind was racing, not with anger this time, but with focus. Evan had tried to steal from me once. He wouldn't get another chance. Evan's outburst that day, the beer demand, the mocking tone, suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been asserting dominance. He'd been protecting access. To him, I wasn't family. I was a bank account with a pulse. The ultimatum wasn't about respect. It was about control. About keeping open the faucet of cash that fed his gambling habit. Back in my room at the Maple Crest Inn, I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Evan Hartman. Evidence Bob's revelation was only the beginning. If Evan had forged documents to steal from me, what else had he been hiding? The courthouse closed at 5. I had just over an hour. After lunch, I drove straight from the diner to the Haversfield County Courthouse, an imposing brick building that had once intimidated me as a young clerk, but now felt like an ally. The clerk's office sat on the second floor. Fluorescent lights, the faint smell of paper and toner. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses processed my request with the calm precision of someone who had seen it all before. "Mr. Holloway," she said after a moment, reviewing the deed I'd handed her. "You do understand this is your daughter's current residence?" "I do," I replied steadily. She compared the title documents to the eviction forms. "And you're the sole owner?" "My name's the only one on the deed," I said. "The residents have violated the conditions of their occupancy." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "What conditions would those be?" I'd prepared for that question. Verbal agreement, mutual respect, and shared contribution to household expenses. Both have been breached. She gave a small, approving nod and stamped the documents with a practiced thud. 30-day notice begins today. If they contest, there'll be a hearing. Otherwise, the sheriff's department will serve final papers once the deadline passes. "How long before they receive this?" I asked. "Usually within 48 hours, she said. "We send everything to the sheriff's office for service." I thanked her and gathered my copies, the embossed seals gleaming under the flickering fluorescent light. For the first time in years, I felt something solid beneath me. The weight of legal authority, of fairness backed by law instead of guilt. No more manipulation. No more blackmail dressed up as family loyalty. Everything, from here on, would be handled by process and paper. My next stop was the Haversfield Police Department. Detective Jim Morrison's office was tucked away in the back corner of the station, a cramped, windowless space overflowing with filing cabinets, old coffee cups, and stacks of reports that looked like they hadn't been moved in years. Jim had aged since the last time I saw him, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dulled a bit. Jim looked older, more gray in his hair, deeper creases around his eyes, but his handshake was still solid, the kind that carried quiet authority. "Walter Holloway," he said, settling into his chair. "What brings you down to my end of town?" "Information," I replied. "Bob Hayes mentioned you might know something about Evan Hartman's gambling activity." At that, Jim's expression shifted, the friendly curiosity fading into professional focus. "Your son-in-law," he confirmed. "What's this about?" I gave him the short version, the confrontation, my departure, the forged loan application, the growing web of deception. Jim listened carefully, jotting the occasional note but never interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he said finally. "Evan's name's come up more than once. He's a regular over at High Ridge Casino, mostly poker tables. Word from the staff is he's been showing up more often lately, and betting heavier." My stomach tightened. "How much are we talking?" Jim rubbed his temple, flipping through a few papers. "Hard to pin down exact figures. Different creditors, different stories. But we've had a few calls. Debt collections, threats, nothing criminal yet, but it's heading that way. I'd estimate between $18,000 and $20,000 total." The number hit like a punch. $18,000 to $20,000. Gone. While he'd been living in my house, eating my food, demanding my obedience, "Who are these creditors?" I asked quietly. Jim exhaled through his nose. "A mix. A few legit lending outfits in town. Credit lines, cash advances, short-term business loans. But the rest?" He hesitated. "Let's just say some of them don't exactly send polite reminders in the mail." I stared at him. "And his timeline?" "He's been stalling payments for about 6 weeks, Jim said. Most creditors give 3 months before they escalate. He's running out of road." The pieces clicked into place like gears finally aligning. Evan's attitude, the forged documents, the beer demand. It wasn't pride or anger. It was fear. I hadn't just been a convenient target. I'd been his last resort. His escape plan. When I left the station, the late afternoon sun had already slipped behind the ridge, leaving Haversfield cloaked in cold gray light. I walked the few blocks back to Maple Crest Inn with a strange sense of calm. That evening, sitting on the edge of the bed, I reviewed the day's progress. Legal eviction notice filed and ready for service. confirmation of Evan's gambling debts and forged documentation. The truth behind his desperation finally laid bare. I wasn't angry anymore, not even disappointed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I simply felt clear. Over the next few days, I began building something that felt unfamiliar, a quiet network of professional allies who understood the truth. People like Bob Hayes and Detective Morrison, who saw beyond the surface drama and recognized the pattern forming underneath it all. Back in my motel room that evening, I opened my laptop and updated the document titled Evan Hartman, Evidence. I added Jim Morrison's report beneath Bob's account, each entry forming another thread in the web. Pattern recognition had been second nature to me during my 30 years in banking, and now, those same instincts made everything unmistakably clear. Evan wasn't just entitled or disrespectful, he was desperate, dishonest, and increasingly dangerous. The more pressure he faced, the more unpredictable he'd become, and I needed to be ready for that. Tomorrow, I'd start making a new set of strategic phone calls, not to bail him out, but to ensure every one of his creditors knew the truth. That he had no legal claim to my property, no shared accounts, no co-signed loans. The goal wasn't revenge, it was prevention, because in a small town like Haversfield, truth spreads faster than rumor, and once it starts moving, it doesn't stop. By Friday, I realized it was time to do something I'd spent years avoiding: control the narrative. The first opportunity arrived at the post office, of all places. I'd barely stepped inside when Mrs. Henderson from the church mailing committee intercepted me near the stamp machine. She was one of those people who collected information the way others collected recipes, every tidbit labeled, filed and ready to share. "Walter, dear," she began, lowering her voice into that familiar tone of practiced concern. "I've been hearing troubling things about your family. Is everything all right?" I considered my response carefully. Mrs. Henderson's words would travel faster than any newspaper headline. By Sunday morning, half the congregation would know whatever version of the story I chose to give her. "Emily and Evan asked me to move out," I said calmly. So I did. Sometimes adult children need to handle their own responsibilities. Her eyebrows arched high enough to rival the church steeple. "They asked you to leave your own house?" "It seemed like the best arrangement for everyone," I said evenly. "But didn't you pay for their wedding?" She whispered, leaning closer. "And help with the down payment on that house. I always wondered how they afforded it on Evan's salary." I nodded but didn't elaborate. Some truths didn't need embellishment. They spoke for themselves. And in towns like Haversfield, facts had a way of turning into wildfire all on their own. My next stop was Holloway's Hardware, though everyone in town still called it Miller's out of habit. I'd worked there part-time after retiring from the bank, mostly to keep my hands busy and my mind sharp. Tom Kowalski, the owner, looked up from an inventory sheet when I walked in. Concern written all over his face. "Walter, I heard you're staying out at the Maple Crest Inn. What's going on?" A few of the employees drifted closer, people I'd known for years. I explained the situation plainly, without bitterness or drama. Their reactions were immediate and unanimous. Shock that Evan had treated me with such disrespect, anger, that I'd been quietly supporting them for years while they took credit for generosity that was never theirs. "You paid for their college tuition?" Dave, the assistant manager, asked, his brow furrowing. "Evan told everyone his family was well off. Said you were the one they were helping out with mortgage payments." "Evan said a lot of things that weren't true," I replied, my voice steady. Tom's expression hardened. "That explains a lot. We offered him extra shifts plenty of times. He always said he couldn't because of other commitments." "Those commitments were probably at the casino," Sarah, from the paint counter, muttered under her breath. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. By the time I left the hardware store, I knew the truth would spread through Haversfield, faster than any newspaper headline. Small towns don't need press releases, and they have coffee counters and lunch breaks. My third stop was St. Luke's Lutheran Church, where Pastor Williams was preparing for the weekend service. He greeted me warmly and led me into his office, a quiet space lined with worn books, smelling faintly of old wood and coffee. "Walter," he began, motioning toward the chair opposite his desk. "A few people have mentioned they're worried about you. Can you help me understand what's happening?" I sat, grateful for his candor. Pastor Williams wasn't a gossip. He was a good man who believed in truth before judgment. "Pastor," I began, "I've been financially supporting my daughter and her husband for 5 years. Last weekend they made it clear that my place in the house depended on following his rules. I chose to leave rather than live under those conditions." He leaned back slowly, his expression heavy with empathy. "That must have been incredibly painful." "It was," I said simply, "but it was also necessary." The words hung there, quiet but final. "It helped put things in focus," I said honestly. "I love my daughter, but I won't be treated like a servant in my own house." Pastor Williams nodded slowly. "Sometimes loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their choices. It sounds like you've been protecting them for too long." On the walk back to the motel, I ducked into Annie's coffee for an afternoon cup. The place hummed with the usual Friday crowd. Retirees, shift workers, moms with strollers. I slipped into a corner table and listened. Snatches of conversation drifted by. "He owes money all over town. Holloway's been covering their bills for years. Funny how they lived so well on Evan's salary." Exactly what I'd expected. Small towns operate like organisms. Information moves fast, and people sort truth from rumor with uncanny speed. My phone rang as I stepped out. It was Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor of 20 years. "Walter, hope you don't mind the call. There's been a lot of shouting at the house. Mostly Evan, but Emily too. Police drove by twice yesterday. Her worry was plain. Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Patterson. I appreciate you keeping an eye on things. I'm fine, just taking it a day at a time." That evening I sat in my motel room going over the day's conversations. The town's social pressure was building on its own. I hadn't needed to do anything vindictive. People simply recognized an injustice when it was spelled out for them. My phone rang again. Unknown number, but the area code looked familiar. Likely one of Evan's creditors. I let it go to voicemail and played the message back. "This is Marcus Reed from Ridgeway Financial Services. We're looking for Evan Hartman regarding a past due account. Please call us at your earliest convenience." The voicemail ended with the sound of paper shuffling. They were calling me because Evan had likely listed my address on his credit applications. More evidence of his deception. More proof he'd been positioning me to shoulder his debts when the time came. I deleted the message and opened my laptop. Time to update my evidence file with today's discoveries. I should have expected some kind of counterattack. Evan never was one to go down quietly. Saturday morning started out peacefully enough. I was sipping coffee, reviewing bank statements when my phone began to ring. First it was Tom from the hardware store, then Mrs. Henderson, then Pastor Williams. Each call brought the same disturbing news. "Walter, I think you need to know what he's saying." Tom's voice was tight with controlled anger. "He came in here about an hour ago, loud as you please, telling everyone you abandoned them without warning. Claims you promised to always take care of them, then cut them off out of spite." "What exactly did he say?" I asked. "That you're having some kind of mental breakdown," Tom said. "Said you threw them out because Emily wouldn't let you control every decision in their lives." He paused. "He's also telling people there's a family medical emergency that needs money and you're refusing to help." I thanked Tom and hung up. My mind already working through the implications. Evan was desperate enough to launch a full-scale public relations campaign, which meant the pressure from his creditors was reaching a breaking point. The next call confirmed it. "Mr. Holloway, this is Detective Morrison," came the familiar voice. "Wanted to give you a heads up. Evan Hartman was here this morning filing a complaint. Says you're being manipulated by someone at the bank to make bad financial decisions. Claimed it was elder abuse." "Elder abuse?" I repeated, incredulous. "Complete nonsense, of course," Jim said. "But he's trying to create an official record questioning your mental competence." I leaned back in the stiff motel chair, feeling the weight of it all settle into clarity rather than panic. This wasn't just about money anymore. Evan wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for his narrative. I told him we'd need medical documentation and at least 2 witness statements. Detective Morrison continued, which of course he can't provide. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Emily's number. "Dad, please pick up," came her trembling voice. "I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand." Her tone was thick with tears. "I'm pregnant, Dad. The stress from all this is making me sick. The doctor says if things don't calm down, I could lose the baby." A familiar twist hit me low in the gut. The same protective instinct that had made me so easy to manipulate for years. But something in her delivery felt off. Rehearsed. Practiced. Desperation shaped with intent. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said evenly. "When did you find out?" "Last week," she said quickly. "Right before everything fell apart." Her voice cracked just enough to sound genuine. "Dad, I can't lose this baby because of money problems." "You always said family comes first?" "Family does come first," I said. "That's why I spent $60,000 on your education and $25,000 on your wedding." "But what about now?" She pressed. "What about your grandchild?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. If she really was pregnant, if there truly was a medical crisis, then maybe my actions could ripple farther than I intended. But the timing, so perfectly aligned with Evan's unraveling, was impossible to ignore. "Emily," I asked carefully, "have you seen a doctor about these pregnancy complications?" A pause. I have an appointment next week." "With whom?" "Dr. Richards, at the women's clinic." I knew Dr. Richards. Lillian had seen her for years. "I'll call her office to see how I can help with medical expenses," I said calmly. "Dad?" "You don't need to call." Emily's voice sharpened, the softness cracking. "If there's a genuine medical emergency involving my grandchild," I replied, "I want to help. Dr. Richards will know the best way to handle it." "You can't just call my doctor," she snapped. "That's private information." "You're right," I said gently. "Then have her call me directly to discuss payment options." The line went silent for a heartbeat, then clicked dead. An hour later, I was walking down Main Street when I saw Evan standing outside Haversfield First National Bank. Hands in his pockets, eyes cold and calculating. He was holding court on the sidewalk outside. Haversfield First National, his voice carrying that familiar, aggressive edge I'd learned to recognize over the years. "He's lost his damn mind," Evan was saying loudly to anyone within earshot. "Old man's gone senile. Thinks everyone's out to steal from him. Kicked his own pregnant daughter out over nothing." I walked up calmly and the shift in the crowd was instant. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Faces changed as they realized who I was. The target of Evan's little performance. Evan noticed a second too late. His face went from smug to scarlet. "There he is," he barked. "The man who abandoned his own family." "Hello, Evan," I said evenly. "How's the gambling debt situation working out?" The words landed like a thrown stone, direct, sharp, impossible to ignore. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Pieces of a much larger puzzle were clicking into place. "You're crazy," Evan stammered, a flicker of panic flashing across his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." $18,000, I said. "According to Detective Morrison, mostly poker tables over at High Ridge Casino." I turned slightly, toward the gathering crowd. Amazing, how much money a man can lose when he's not paying his own living expenses. Evan's face went from red to a dangerous shade of purple. He stepped closer, towering over me, fists clenched. "You senile old bastard. You can't just—" "I can document every dollar I spent supporting you for 5 years. I cut in, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can you document where your paychecks went?" The silence that followed was almost theatrical. People were no longer looking at me. They were staring at him. And in that silence, Evan realized he'd lost control of the narrative. "Come on," he growled, shoving his way through the crowd. "This isn't over, Walter." I watched him storm off, noting how several people reached for their phones, recording, texting, capturing pieces of the truth as it finally spread. By the time I got back to the Maple Crest Inn, I knew the real story would already be making the rounds online. I opened my laptop and began documenting the day's events. Every conversation, every witness, every detail. Evan's counterattack was collapsing because it had been built entirely on lies, and lies rarely survive sunlight. The people of Haversfield knew my reputation. They'd seen my integrity for decades. No one who truly knew me would believe claims of senility or cruelty. Not when the facts, and the community itself, were finally on my side. But the pregnancy claim still worried me. If Emily truly was pregnant, things were more complicated. I needed facts before I made my next move. I picked up my phone and dialed Dr. Richards' office. If there was a real medical emergency, I would help. But I wouldn't be manipulated by a fabricated crisis. Evan's public threats earlier that day had crossed a line. Back at the Maple Crest Inn, I pulled out my phone and called Detective Morrison. "James, we need to talk. Evan's behavior today showed a pattern of escalation that concerns me." "How so?" he asked. "He confronted me publicly," I said. "Made threatening gestures in front of witnesses. His whole demeanor suggested someone losing control." I looked out the motel window at downtown Haversfield. "I'd like to file a formal complaint and explore protection options." "Come in tomorrow morning," Jim said. "Bring any documentation you have," but I didn't have to wait until morning. About an hour later, a knock came at my door. Steve Brennan, the night manager at the Maple Crest, stood there, his posture still carrying the crispness of his army days. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "that man who was yelling in our parking lot earlier. He came back about 20 minutes ago. Stood outside your door for maybe 5 minutes, then left. Made some guests nervous. Did he say anything specific?" I asked. "Muttered something about teaching old fools lessons," Steve said. "I've got it on security video if you need it. Security footage. Physical evidence of Evan's threatening behavior on private property. Steve, would you be willing to provide that footage to the police?" "Absolutely," he said firmly. "Guy like that shouldn't be intimidating elderly residents." The next morning, I arrived at the police station with Steve's USB drive and a detailed timeline of Evan's escalating behavior. Detective Morrison reviewed everything with professional thoroughness, flipping through my notes and pausing at the video stills. "Walter," he said finally, "this shows a clear pattern of intimidation. Combined with what I witnessed yesterday at the bank, we have more than enough grounds for a restraining order." "What would that involve?" I asked. Jim's answer was crisp and legal sounding. "A court-ordered prohibition. He'd be barred from coming within 500 feet of you or your property. Violate that order and it's immediate arrest." Jim leaned back, face tightening. "There's something else you should know. Evan consulted a lawyer Friday about adverse possession." Those words hit like ice. "Squatters' rights, exactly," Jim said. "He was researching whether he could claim ownership by living there continuously." His expression went hard. "Montana requires 5 years of hostile occupation. They've been there 3. He was planning to wait 2 more years, then file." The scope of it staggered me. This wasn't casual freeloading. It was a slow, calculated scheme to take my house through legal trickery. "Does he have any legitimate claim?" I asked. "None," Jim replied. "Adverse possession needs occupation without the owner's permission. You gave them permission to live there. They never paid rent or property taxes. Legally, there's no basis. But the fact he planned this shows premeditation." He tapped a file folder on his desk. "With the evidence you've brought, I can fast-track a restraining order. You could have it by this afternoon." I left the station with a clearer picture of the man living under my roof, not merely entitled but scheming. The beer incident, the shouting, all part of a larger plan to keep the money flowing until he could claim the place as his own. Walking to my car, I scrolled my contacts. Time to make the calls that would close the circle. The first was to Marcus Webb at Frontier Financial Services, one of the collectors who'd been reaching my number. "Mr. Webb, I'm returning your call about Evan Hartman. I need to clarify something important. He no longer lives at my address and he has no legal claim to my property." He listed my address on all his credit applications. I explained to Marcus Webb, "But he was a guest in my home, not a resident. I evicted him last week. If you're looking for him, he works at Mountain View Auto on Highway 93. The next call went to Continental Credit Recovery. "This is Walter Holloway," I said evenly. "You've been contacting me about Evan Hartman's accounts. I need to clarify something. Mr. Hartman has no ownership, interest in my property, and no legal residence." There, each conversation was short and professional. Wasn't paying his debts or sharing private details, just correcting the false address he'd been using to dodge accountability. By noon, I'd spoken with 6 different collection agencies. Evan's carefully balanced facade, his years of lies and misdirection, was about to collapse under the weight of verified truth. That afternoon, Judge Morrison signed the restraining order. Evan Hartman was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Any violation meant immediate arrest and possible jail. Time I drove back to the Maple Crest Inn, feeling a quiet, satisfying sense of justice. Not revenge, just balance restored. Evan had spent 3 years scheming to steal my home. Now he couldn't even set foot near it without breaking the law. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, old man." I forwarded the message to Detective Morrison, then blocked the number. Evidence collection had become second nature by now. Monday morning, I filed the finalized restraining order. By noon, I was watching Evan's world collapse from every direction. The courthouse clerk stamped the official copy with brisk authority. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "this order is active immediately. Any contact or approach within 500 feet is a criminal violation." "Thank you," I said, taking the papers. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner somehow. The sheriff's deputy would serve Evan the order within hours. My phone rang before I reached the car. "Walter, this is Mike Brennan from Mountain View Auto." Mike was Evan's manager, a decent man who'd built his dealership on trust and word of mouth. "I need to ask you something directly," he said. "Are the things Evan's been saying about you true?" I took a slow breath. "What exactly has he been saying, Mike?" "That you had some kind of breakdown," Mike said reluctantly. "That you threw him and Emily out because you're showing signs of dementia. That there's a family medical emergency," Mike Brennan continued, "and that you're refusing to help." His voice carried skepticism. "Thing is, Walter, I've known you for 20 years. This doesn't sound like the man who co-signed my son's first car loan." "Mike," I said evenly, "Evan gave me an ultimatum, to obey his rules or leave. I chose to leave. There's no medical emergency and my mind's clear. My banker, lawyer, and the police can all confirm that." A long pause. "I was afraid of that," Mike said finally. "I've had 3 customers today mention Evan owing them money. One even recognized him from the casino. This is starting to affect my business." "I understand," I said quietly. "I'm going to have to let him go." Mike sighed. "Can't have that kind of controversy around customers who trust us with major purchases." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Annie's coffee when I saw a white van pull up to my old house on Maple Drive. The magnetic sign on the door read, "Continental Credit Recovery." I'd spoken to them on Friday about Evan's false address claims. Looks like they'd acted fast. My phone buzzed. Emily's number. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "there are men at the house asking about Evan's debts. They're asking about our income, our assets, everything." "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them the truth, that Evan doesn't own your house and doesn't live here anymore. But they're talking about garnishing wages, seizing assets. Dad, I don't understand any of this." "Sweetheart," I said gently, "that's what happens when someone borrows money they can't repay. Those are consequences Evan created, not me." "He owes $18,000, she whispered. "How is that possible?" So she really hadn't known the full extent. "Gambling debts," I said quietly. "High Ridge Casino, according to Detective Morrison." Silence on the line. Then finally a small broken voice. "He told me he was working overtime those nights." "I'm sorry you're learning this way, Emily." Her breath hitched, and the sheriff's deputy was here too. "He served Evan some kind of legal papers. He's been ranting and throwing things ever since." "The restraining order," I said softly. Evan was probably just realizing the truth, that every route he'd tried to manipulate had closed. Every lie had been exposed. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel cornered. He did. "Dad, he's talking about leaving town." Emily's voice trembled through the phone. "He says there's nothing left here for him." "What am I supposed to do?" "Make decisions based on who Evan really is," I said quietly. "Not who you hoped he was." That evening, I parked across the street from my old house and watched the chaos unfold under the porch light. 3 different creditor vehicles had come and gone throughout the day. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor for over 20 years, stood on her porch and gave me a small, sad wave. She'd seen it all unravel. Her expression carried that blend of empathy and helplessness only a longtime neighbor could have. Through the living room window, I could see the argument. Evan's movements were sharp, aggressive, his voice rising in visible bursts of anger. Emily stood rigid, defensive, hands crossed protectively, eyes wet but resolute. The fairy tale marriage that had been built on the scaffolding of my money was collapsing under its own weight. My phone buzzed. A text from Steve at the Maple Crest Inn. That guy tried to get in the building again. Told him about the restraining order. He left, but he was really angry. I immediately forwarded the message to Detective Morrison. Evan had violated the restraining order within hours of being served. His desperation was growing, which made him dangerous, but also predictable. A man with gambling debts, no job, and a restraining order hanging over his head doesn't have many options left. He could take responsibility for the mess he'd made, or he could run, and knowing Evan, running seemed far more likely. As I drove back to the motel, the thought lingered heavy in my mind. If he fled town to dodge his creditors, what would happen to Emily? Would she go with him, bound by loyalty and habit? Or would she finally see the truth and make a different choice? Either way, the consequences were theirs to face now. I'd spent 5 years protecting them from reality, shielding them from every overdue bill, every mistake, every reckless decision. That protection had ended the moment they forced me to choose. Between my dignity and their demands, I chose dignity. Now, they would have to choose their own path forward. 2 days of watching their desperation from a distance was enough. On Wednesday morning, I picked up my phone and called Emily. "Meet me at the diner," I said. "Just you. I can't leave Evan alone right now." "Dad?" she whispered. "He's really struggling with everything that's happening," Emily said softly. "Then we have nothing to discuss," I replied. "The restraining order means I can't be around him anyway." There was a long silence. Then almost in a whisper, "Where do you want to meet?" "Main Street Diner, 2 o'clock. Back corner booth where we can talk privately." I arrived early and chose a booth that faced away from the street. I didn't want passing cars or curious stares distracting from what needed to be said. When Emily walked in, she looked older than her 28 years. The weight of the past weeks had carved faint lines around her eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she fidgeted with the strap of her purse before sliding into the seat across from me. She didn't wait for small talk. "Dad, I know you're angry, but Evan's lost his job, and the debt collectors won't stop calling. The phone rings all day. People are showing up at the door demanding money we don't have." I waited until she finished, then spoke evenly. "I'm offering you one chance to end this with some dignity, Emily." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Public acknowledgement of the truth," I said. "Full disclosure of how much I supported you both, and an honest explanation of why I left." Her face flushed. "You want me to humiliate myself in front of the whole town?" "I want you to tell the truth," I said calmly. "There's a difference. What kind of acknowledgement?" I leaned forward slightly. "A short testimony at St. Luke's on Sunday, a letter to the editor of the Haversfield Tribune, and a public Facebook post visible to all our mutual friends, outlining the truth. The college tuition I paid, the wedding costs, the mortgage, and the ultimatum that forced me to walk away." She looked down, her voice small. "Dad, people will think... They'll think you had a father who loved you enough to sacrifice his retirement for your happiness," I said quietly, "and that you took it for granted until it was gone." Emily stared at her untouched coffee. Her eyes shimmered, caught somewhere between guilt and grief. "What about Evan?" she asked finally. "Evan," I said, "is no longer part of any equation involving me. The restraining order is permanent. If you choose to stay married to him, that's your decision. But it means choosing him over any relationship with me." Her lips trembled. She didn't answer. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet hum of the diner filled the silence. The soft clatter of dishes. The faint hiss of coffee being poured. This wasn't revenge, it was accountability, and it was long overdue. "You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father," Emily said softly. "I'm asking you to choose between a man who threatened me and the man who raised you," I said quietly. "The fact that you see those as equivalent tells me everything about how far apart we've drifted." She was silent for a long moment, eyes flicking between mine and the table, processing the weight of it. "What about the house?" she whispered. "It's been in our family for generations. It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative," I said. 3 families of veterans will live there. People who understand what service and sacrifice actually mean." The words hit her like a physical blow. "The will's already changed," I continued gently. "Witnessed, signed, and filed with my attorney. Even if you do everything I've asked, the house won't come back to you. That decision is final." "Why?" "Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is based on love, not inheritance," I said. For 5 years, you treated me like a convenient funding source. I want to see if there's anything left between us beyond financial dependency." Emily's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time, not the practiced manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I really am. I never meant for things to go this far." "Sorry isn't enough anymore, sweetheart," I said gently. "The whole town watched you and Evan treat me like a servant in my own home. They watched you choose his demands over my dignity. Words are just words now. I need to see action. What if I can't do it?" she said, voice cracking. "What if I can't stand up in front of everyone and admit how wrong we were?" "Then you'll live with the consequences of that choice," I said calmly. "Evan will probably leave town to escape his creditors. Men like him always run when things get hard. You can go with him and start over somewhere else, or you can stay here and rebuild your life with honesty." She swallowed hard. "And if I do what you're asking?" "Then maybe," I said. "Over time, we can build a real relationship. Not based on money, guilt, or obligation, but on mutual respect between two adults." Emily looked down at her hands, trembling slightly as she twisted the strap of her purse. For the first time in years, I saw something in her face that looked like the young girl I used to know. Not entitlement or defiance, but quiet uncertainty mixed with a glimmer of resolve. Emily wiped her eyes with a napkin. "How long do I have to decide?" "Sunday morning," I said. "Church starts at 10. If you're not there to tell the truth, I'll know you've made your choice." She stood slowly, looking smaller somehow, older and more fragile than when she'd arrived. "Dad," she whispered, "do you think you could ever forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and for a moment, I saw glimpses of the child she used to be, the one who braided dandelions into crowns and begged for bedtime stories about brave princesses who made the right choice in the end. "Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing," I said quietly. "I forgave you the day I decided to leave rather than fight. But trust has to be earned back, one honest action at a time." She nodded, her jaw trembling, and walked toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of a decision that would shape the rest of her life. I stayed seated, watching through the window as she drove away. Sunday was 4 days away. By then, I would know whether my daughter had the courage to choose truth over comfort, responsibility over loyalty to a man who had never deserved it. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Walked into St. Luke's Lutheran Church, unsure of what I'd find. Would she be there? Would she speak? The sanctuary was fuller than usual. The low hum of expectation carried a charge in the air. Word had spread that something would happen, something about the Holloways. I took my usual pew 3 rows from the front and waited. Pastor Williams began the service with the familiar rhythm of hymns and readings, but the congregation's attention was elsewhere. Their eyes flicked toward the back every few moments. When testimony time came, I saw her. Emily rose from the back row, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt. She looked small walking down the center aisle, fragile but determined. When she reached the podium, she gripped its edges tightly, drew a deep breath, and lifted her gaze to the people who'd known her since childhood. "I need to tell you all something important about my father," she began. Her voice was clear, carrying easily through the quiet sanctuary. "For the past 5 years, Walter Holloway has been supporting my husband and me financially. He paid $160,000 for my college education, when I could have gone to a state school. He paid $25,000 for our wedding when Evan's family couldn't afford their share." Murmurs rippled through the congregati. "You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father," Emily said softly. "I'm asking you to choose between a man who threatened me and the man who raised you." I said quietly, "The fact that you see those as equivalent tells me everything about how far apart we've drifted." She was silent for a long moment, eyes flicking between mine and the table, processing the weight of it. "What about the house?" she whispered. "It's been in our family for generations. It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative," I said. 3 families of veterans will live there, people who understand what service and sacrifice actually mean." The words hit her like a physical blow. "The will's already changed," I continued gently. "Witnessed, signed, and filed with my attorney. Even if you do everything I've asked, the house won't come back to you. That decision is final. Why? Because I need to know that any reconciliation between us is based on love, not inheritance, I said. For 5 years you treated me like a convenient funding source. I want to see if there's anything left between us beyond financial dependency. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time. Not the practiced manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I really am. I never meant for things to go this far. Sorry isn't enough anymore, sweetheart, I said gently. The whole town watched you and Evan treat me like a servant in my own home. They watched you choose his demands over my dignity. Words are just words now. I need to see action. What if I can't do it? She said, voice cracking. What if I can't stand up in front of everyone and admit how wrong we were? Then you'll live with the consequences of that choice, I said calmly. Evan will probably leave town to escape his creditors. Men like him always run when things get hard. You can go with him and start over somewhere else, or you can stay here and rebuild your life with honesty. She swallowed hard. And if I do what you're asking? Then maybe, I said, over time we can build a real relationship. Not based on money, guilt, or obligation, but on mutual respect between two adults. Emily looked down at her hands, trembling slightly as she twisted the strap of her purse. For the first time in years, I saw something in her face that looked like the young girl I used to know. Not entitlement or defiance, but quiet uncertainty mixed with a glimmer of resolve. Emily wiped her eyes with a napkin. How long do I have to decide? Sunday morning, I said. Church starts at 10. If you're not there to tell the truth, I'll know you've made your choice. She stood slowly, looking smaller somehow, older and more fragile than when she'd arrived. Dad, she whispered, do you think you could ever forgive me? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and for a moment, I saw glimpses of the child she used to be. The one who braided dandelions into crowns and begged for bedtime stories about brave princesses who made the right choice in the end. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing, I said quietly. I forgave you the day I decided to leave rather than fight. But trust has to be earned back one honest action at a time. She nodded, her jaw trembling, and walked toward the door, shoulders bent under the weight of a decision that would shape the rest of her life. I stayed seated, watching through the window as she drove away. Sunday was 4 days away. By then, I would know whether my daughter had the courage to choose truth over comfort, responsibility over loyalty to a man who had never deserved it. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Walked into St. Luke's Lutheran Church, unsure of what I'd find. Would she be there? Would she speak? The sanctuary was fuller than usual. The low hum of expectation carried a charge in the air. Word had spread that something would happen. Something about the Holloways. I took my usual pew 3 rows from the front and waited. Pastor Williams began the service with the familiar rhythm of hymns and readings, but the congregation's attention was elsewhere. Their eyes flicked toward the back every few moments. When testimony time came, I saw her. Emily rose from the back row, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt. She looked small walking down the center aisle, fragile but determined. When she reached the podium, she gripped its edges tightly, drew a deep breath, and lifted her gaze to the people who'd known her since childhood. I need to tell you all something important about my father, she began. Her voice was clear, carrying easily through the quiet sanctuary. For the past 5 years, Walter Holloway has been supporting my husband and me financially. He paid $160,000 for my college education, when I could have gone to a state school. He paid $25,000 for our wedding when Evan's family couldn't afford their share. Murmurs rippled through the congregation, shock, disbelief, sorrow. Emily continued, her voice steadying with every word. The numbers Emily spoke were precise, documented sacrifices that left no room for rumor or misinterpretation. He gave us his family home, she continued, her voice gaining strength. The house his parents left him, the place where he lived with my mother Lillian for 20 years. When we couldn't make the mortgage payments, he paid them. When we needed groceries or help with utilities, or car insurance, he covered it all, while living on nothing but his Social Security. The sanctuary was so still you could hear the soft rustle of clothing as people leaned forward to listen. 3 weeks ago, Emily went on, when my father refused to follow my husband's orders like a servant, We gave him an ultimatum: obey Evan or leave his own home. And my father chose to leave, rather than surrender his dignity. The air shifted. An almost tangible silence, thick with realization. Even the children in the back rows seemed to sense the weight of what was being said. I stood by, she said quietly, and watched my husband disrespect the man who sacrificed his retirement for our comfort. I chose loyalty to someone who threatened my father, over loyalty to the man who raised me with love and patience. Tears streaked her face now, but her voice was strong, each word steady and deliberate. I'm standing here today because my father offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. I was wrong. Evan was wrong. My father deserved gratitude and respect, and instead, we gave him ultimatums and demands. She turned then, her eyes meeting mine across the crowded sanctuary. Dad, she said, her voice breaking, I know I'm sorry isn't enough for what we put you through, but I'm hoping it's a start. The congregation erupted into a soft wave of murmurs, and not gossip but support. Heads nodded, eyes glistened, and more than a few hands reached for tissues. When Emily returned to her seat, Pastor William stepped up to the podium, emotion visible in his face. Sometimes, he said gently, the hardest kind of courage is the courage to admit our mistakes publicly. Emily has shown that courage today, and her father, he looked toward me, voice thick with emotion, has shown us all what true dignity looks like under pressure. After the service, people approached me one after another, with embraces, handshakes, words of respect. Mrs. Henderson clasped my hand tightly. We all suspected you were helping them, Walter. What we didn't know was how they repaid your kindness. Tom from the hardware store clapped me on the shoulder. You did right by her, Walter. Took a long road to get here, but I'm glad the truth's out. That took real character, what you did, Tom said as we stood outside the church. Setting boundaries isn't easy when family's involved. I nodded, accepting his words with a quiet gratitude that didn't need explaining. But the most meaningful moment came when Emily approached me near the steps, clutching her coat against the brisk wind. The letter to the Haversfield Tribune will run Wednesday, she said, and the Facebook post goes up tonight. She hesitated, eyes softening. Evan left town yesterday, packed his truck while I was at work and disappeared. No forwarding address, no note, nothing. I wasn't surprised. Men like Evan never faced consequences. They ran from them. I'm sorry your marriage ended this way, I said gently. I'm not, she replied, her voice steadier than I'd heard it in years. I filed for divorce this morning. Found out he'd been using my credit cards for gambling. The debts are worse than we thought. I nodded. Then it's better this way. You're finally free. 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of what had once been my family home, now transformed into something new, something good. 3 veteran families were moving into the renovated apartments created by the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. The old house had been restructured into 3 units, each with its own kitchen and small living space, with a shared garden and playground behind it. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, recently returned from deployment, directed her 2 young children toward the swings donated by local businesses. Mr. Holloway, she said, approaching me with a smile that carried both pride and exhaustion. This opportunity means everything to us. Thank you for choosing veterans for this gift. Veterans understand sacrifice, I said quietly. This house should serve people who've truly earned it. As the children's laughter echoed through the yard, I felt something deep inside settle. The first real peace I'd known in years. My own life had found a rhythm again. The lakeside cabin I'd purchased with what was left of my savings had become a sanctuary, small, sturdy, and mine. Mornings began with coffee on the deck overlooking Flathead Lake, the water still and silver under the dawn light. Afternoons meant quiet fishing or walking the wooded trails nearby. Evenings were for reading, for cooking meals in a kitchen that finally felt like home. No shouting, no guilt, no walking on eggshells in my own house, just quiet. Just life. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a text from Emily. Dad, I'm 3 months into counseling and learning a lot about healthy relationships. Could we try having coffee sometime? I read it twice, then looked out at the lake. Calm, reflective, forgiving. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Of course, sweetheart, I typed back. Let's start with coffee. I'd like to earn your trust back. One conversation at a time. I smiled, glancing out across Flathead Lake, where an osprey hovered above the shallows, wings poised for the dive. Emily had kept her word. The letter in the Haversfield Tribune had been honest, detailed, and without excuses. Her post online had reached hundreds of people, and for once the comments weren't cruel or judgmental. They were kind, supportive, grateful to finally know the truth. But what mattered most wasn't public approval. It was that she'd chosen accountability over avoidance, effort over entitlement. She was rebuilding, one step, one word, one truth at a time. I typed back a simple reply. Coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner, her response came instantly. I'll be there. And Dad, thank you for not giving up on me completely. I set the phone aside and looked back toward the lake. The osprey rose into the air, a silver fish clutched tight in its talons. Sometimes patience and dignity are rewarded, even when the wait feels endless. The setting sun spilled gold across the water, the peaks of the Rockies burning orange in its reflection. From across the way came the sound of children laughing at the veterans' housing complex, families building new beginnings in the home where I'd once learned the hardest lesson of all. The difference between generosity and enabling, justice served, dignity preserved, and maybe, just maybe, a daughter ready to earn back her father's trust the right way. Through honesty, not obligation, it had been worth the wait. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.